I'm going to start the recording, and I'm going to bless to start our new year of learning off at Or Zarua together for a nightly lecture, for coming together on a topic of great importance to us all. I'm going to bless Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. And we are going to get into some of our learning tonight about miraculous medicine, this idea of vaccination in Jewish law and halachic history, of Midrash and making Jewish law. And I'm going to start with a few remarks and then move into some sources. I'm going to take a look at this miracle of a moment, in my opinion, miracle of a moment of two vaccines in the midst of this pandemic, only months in production, if you will, and brought to the marketplace of humanity for the healing potential and power that they have, which I want to celebrate in that way. And then I want to reflect on where vaccinations have made themselves part of the corpus of Jewish law, and talk about it spiritually from our standpoint of people who are potentially recipients, if not some of us have already received at least the first shot. And that's been reported in Minyan and at Havdalah and different events. I want to publicly thank those doctors who are here tonight, and particularly a few doctors from our community who helped me over the months develop understandings of this medical situation. So to Dr. Donna Mildevan, to Dr. Laura Fisher, to Dr. Barry Kohler, to Dr. Marcia Kalin, particularly, thank you. Before I begin, and I do say, and I will say to you and to the rest of the medical professionals, if there's something later that you want to clarify, please, I invite some clarification and medical clarification. We would turn to you for contraindications. You know, I'll say right off the bat, if you want to know what Jewish law really says, it says take the vaccine, but make sure with your physician there are no contraindications to taking the vaccine. So if that is the whole night, if that's why you're here, you just heard the bottom line, you're done. You got the halachic answer, boom. But I have more to share with you, and I have more of a history to give you, and I have more reflections to make. So hang in there, and we'll do that. The power of receiving medical information these days is made easier through Zoom and through all kinds of online meetings for rabbis like myself. And I want to thank him, though I don't know him personally. I want to thank Dr. Aaron Glatt, who's the chairman of medicine, chief of infectious diseases, a hospital epidemiologist at Mount Sinai South Nassau Hospital, also who has been very instrumental in educating rabbis about this disease, about these vaccines, and all of the halachic matters that they bring up, because he's very much into the Jewish legal aspects of administering these vaccines as well. So that, thanks now, Hakarat Hatov in our midst. I also want to say that I'm grateful again for all of you being here on a Monday night, right after the beginning of the New Year's. We're in the midst of the first work week of the year, and here we are learning on a Monday night. And as Or Zarua, it really inspires me that we get together to have such great learning opportunities in the midst of our lives and maintain our learning culture in such a deep way. So if we were Jews living in the 18th century, 17th century, 16th century, we would long for a break from a relentless onslaught of all kinds of disease. And so we have to remember that we live in a very different time, and our experience with disease and sickness, though it's something we contend with all the time, it's a little different than in the past. We can say through the eyes of medical history that in the 18th century alone, an estimated 400,000 Europeans died each year based on the medical emergencies they had and the pandemical or epidemics that they had in their midst. We know that there was a scientific breakthrough in exposing healthy individuals to disease, hopefully a mild form. That started the preventing of more serious disease. And that was a shift, as Kuhn calls them in the structure of scientific revolutions. That was a shift. And even though it might have been played with before in the history of medicine, and there are those who have traced some of that within cultures, that the functional procedures to share this level of small amounts of disease were created, and that was not without risk. And Jews who are pro-Chai Behem, we should live good lives and we should embrace life, we always considered what the risks would be whenever we thought about therapies, even though we were very pro-active pursuers of medical treatment. We know that at the end of the 18th century, Rabbi Avraham ben Shlomo Nossich created a pamphlet called Ale Trufa, dealing with the tragic loss of his 2 children to smallpox, and beseeching rabbis of his generation to inoculate and to really embrace this new kind of treatment. And that letter was published, and he shared from personal experience just how dangerous the disease was and the severity of his own loss. And that really sparked people to embrace this kind of approach. And then other authorities would definitely agree with him and enjoin the halachic authorities of their day to do the same. And they all started to be positively inclined towards vaccination, towards inoculation. There are those who wanted to know from the start, and we will get into some of these sources and you will see them later. Well, what if, all right, let's say we're pro-vaccine here. What if the doctor coming to give me the shot is only coming on a Shabbos? I mean, this is not my bris. What if the only time I can get the treatment is on Shabbat? It's through that social history of reading those kind of halachic tshuvot that we realize that authorities were indeed positive about allowing their congregants and allowing those who were asking the question, may I do this? That they were positive, they were positively inclined about taking the vaccination. And they would go so far as to say that, of course, you should try to have him stay around if he's going to arrive on Shabbat until Motzei Shabbos, make Havdalah, and do it Saturday night. But if he can't, and he has to leave because he's on his way to, treat others, take the shot. Take the shot. And so we see that this fundamental issue of moving towards health for herd immunity, or whatever that right term is, because I've heard a number of terms used for when a majority in a community have immunity. So I won't get into the technicalities, and I don't want to necessarily invite Talmudic debate about the right term for group immunity. But the idea that we should have enough people inoculated becomes the risk assessment, statistical analysis to say that we have to really go for this and that we better break down barriers halachically in order to really encourage this. And so that has been the general approach since smallpox. Now, it was quite miraculous that we even had such a scientific revolution, as we said, with the shift of the zeitgeist, the thinking that we should share some disease, active disease, or whatever type of new structural way we could create the vaccination that might cause some danger and allow for any risk within the community, risk to life, in order to inoculate. But we did indeed see that momentum, and that gained momentum since the time of smallpox. And we're going to see texts that express that. Before, again, now, last piece of the introduction, miraculous. I called it miraculous medicine. Do you know that the Ebola vaccine took 5 years to develop, and they thought that was rocket fast, right? That was turbocharged. Because normally, what I understand from all kinds of peers that I've asked and people who are writing about this for the literature is that it takes anywhere between 7 and 11 years to do all the testing that's necessary to bring a new vaccine to market. And so whatever you want to say about the political situation that we live in and the time that we live in, I want to frame it from a standpoint of sitting a little on the bleachers of life and looking down, that even in the craziness that we're experiencing in the United States of America, even with the fault lines and eruptions around the globe that we really have experienced with Operation Warp Speed, one of the most miraculous public health endeavors that's ever been undertaken. And that in a matter of months, we have a guaranteed reimbursement to a private sector who was whisked into data sharing and pursuing for commercial purposes, yes, their vaccines. And with an overlay of there is capitalist forces at work here, which all work towards society's goodness in the best of the ideas of the founding fathers who really embraced capitalist ideas, that we ultimately wanted the marketplace to turn up a vaccine, and we got 2. And we have to realize that regulators were working with industry and came and coordinated so that the pre-clinical trials wouldn't hit the fault lines that they normally hit and get reviewed and then sent back. We had more chevruta within the system than ever before. And that was hearing from regulators and Pfizer and Moderna folks, but that was also hearing from the major post-scheme who were deciding whether or not this vaccine or these 2 vaccines were safe enough to say to the Jewish community that these vaccines, if you can get one, they are obligatory because they provide the best possibility towards a safe life right now for you and potentially for others, despite the fact that we still have to test for whether or not someone who's vaccinated can still spread disease. And that test is yet to be done. The idea that you have double-blind prospective studies with 30,000, 40,000 subjects, I mean, these things sound impossible to get done in the time frame that they were done. But they were indeed done. And so when most people tell me as a rabbi from the medical world that I was in touch with, that there were no major shortcuts or any real shortcuts taken to test the efficacy and to test the safety of these vaccines, and that they're on the market now and being used, distributed, put into the arms of people who we love. So we've got to not only trust, but we've got to really verify that this is incredible. And yes, there might be some risk involved, as there is with any of our endeavors in our world and our lives, but miraculously, we have the safety data, the efficacy data, and a unanimous vote to approve. And where there are gaps, like we don't know about this age level and we don't know about the spread, there are people identifying the next kind of questions we need to test and the next kind of tests that need to be organized. But both studies showed a 95% efficacy rate, at least. And neither knew of the other study to publish that number. So to me, again, it's like when I say my prayers in the morning, Modim anachnu lach, We thank you, God. For every day, there are miracles that are with us. Kol yom, nisecha imanu. We understand that these kinds of realities are really miracles to be celebrated. And that doesn't mean we turn blind eyes to the questions we need to ask. But when we talk about how they looked at the kind of approach they would take and created the spike proteins that the body recognizes to make the antibodies to thwart the virus, Dr. Mildevan, that's about as much as I'm giving. So in case anybody wants to know, there are folks who understand every detail of what's going on by way of verse. But that was my basic, but the unbelievable structure of these medications and the fact that there were placebo groups and the studies run correctly and that we have all kinds of realities that the rare side effect happened 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million for the different studies, that there's no scientific evidence that it can cause infertility, that somehow there was some ultimate news that it was fake about it attacking placentas, that we were able to sort out what was fake, what is real, what is incredibly difficult to do over the course of a decade in only months. And for that, I don't say anything extra. I'm not suggesting, and I will get into this issue later as well. What do we say right now about these matters? Do we say a bracha because this is the reality that just was created anew, that we have 2 vaccines? Or am I more concerned when it comes to blessings and prayers with what an individual might say, being part of all this, or what an individual might pray now that the challenge for humanity is really on? And that is, how do we really distribute this thing? And how do we prioritize ethically? And how do we endeavor to rectify the system's hiccups that you knew inevitably was going to happen? Instead of complaining, we need to move to spiritual action. Instead of worry that we won't get it, we need to pray, and we need to potentially help fix. That's the bigger concern I'll have with texts by the end of tonight. Where's the individual? Is it a bracha? Is it a prayer? Is it a bracha and a prayer? And what am I saying a blessing over? And what am I praying for? The spiritual side. So here's what we're going to do. A little bit of history about where we are, again, in a capsule once I start sharing the texts. Bringing up the big questions about the vaccines. Noting the history in halachic sources, starting from Torah, of course, because that's the roots of our law, and then looking at how the embrace of medical treatments and particularly vaccinations developed, and then showing you some reactions from around the Jewish world about the new tshuvot that were created in the conservative and the Orthodox world that very much impacts us when we think about Jewish law. And then finally, the questions of the individual and the blessings and the prayers. So here we go. So Albert Einstein said, there are only 2 ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is though everything is a miracle. So as an overlay, I don't know if anyone knows him, but this is my friend, Rabbi Lee Buckman, who posted on his Facebook in Israel that he was getting his shot. He said they carded him right at the door. He was a little younger than 60, but they let him in. So they carded him, they let him in, and he got his vaccine, he got the first shot, and he's waiting on the second one. I think I don't have to tell anyone, if you've seen the press on Israel's distribution system, wow, again, what a miracle. I'm not focusing on it tonight. That'll be the talk of a different topic. That'll be the topic of a different night's discussion. But Israel's response is just Or Chadash, Al Tzion Tayir. It's light coming from Zion. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards wrote a tshuva that was just published. I wrote to Rabbi Dorf, who's been a guest at Or Zarua, and he said, hold on, it's coming tomorrow. And indeed, here it is, published just now in 2021. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards is the halachic decision-making body of the conservative rabbinate. And it's because of the pandemic, COVID-19 vaccines have been approved in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration under emergency use authorization. The US is not alone in that endeavor. And so just to make you aware that the tshuva in modern times by the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards includes the background reportage about the processes that I mentioned at the outset of our talk. Rabbi Dorf, as the American Jewish University's rector and distinguished professor in philosophy, also writes a lot about law and religion and about issues of prevention and preventative medicine. He said the following: with its strong sense of community and duty, the Jewish tradition would have us use communal measures to preserve our lives and health as much as possible. It would be a violation of Jewish law, for example, for a Jew to refuse to be inoculated against the disease, at least where the inoculation has a proven track record of effectiveness. That's going to, kind of prick our ears. This one just came to market. Jews, on the contrary, have a positive duty to have themselves and their children inoculated against all diseases where that preventative measure is effective and available. So Rabbi Dorf, in a very short paragraph, highlighted the efficacy, which of course we rely upon studies for, and so we could just simply rely on the FDA and the studies that were done. But we want to really be sure as Jews that we're not doing anything too risky. He's got a number of ethical framework considerations, principles to guide triage decisions that the tshuva brings forward. And that is treating people equally, either through first come, first serve, or through a lottery. Interesting, that's not really the direction we're going. But that seemed to be the classic way that Jewish authorities got out of favoring anyone. 2, you might, though, come at it a different way, favoring the worst off on the basis of the rule of rescue. 3, maximizing total benefits, utilitarianism, measured either by the number of lives saved or the number of life years saved. So you might have a formula like that. Promoting and rewarding social usefulness based either on instrumental value for the future of the society or on reciprocity for past contributions, including those on the front lines of fighting COVID-19. So that seems to be a little bit more where things landed. And these are all, they can either work together in a package and you can weigh them, or according to Rabbi Dorf, you could choose one. As of January 4, here's what the CDC and New York just published. NewYorkCity.gov, and using some CDC guidelines. And you can see that they have prioritized groups. And I know a number of people who kind of know already, based on some of the pieces in the New York Times and the Journal and the different papers, which group they fall into and how and why and what they're getting. And the idea is that we have done a little bit of a priority listing on the society level. But the question could be, from a Jewish standpoint still, a Jew could ask whether each of the COVID-19 vaccines, even though they were approved under emergency processes, would be considered a refuah bidukah, an established treatment. Now, I'm telling you right from the start that there's no question that they are considered safe because of the approval of the FDA, But in halachic history, there has been some concern that administering vaccines might not be the safest way to go. Even with the small percentage of anti-vaxxers and people who considered them unsafe, I have to show you, the last time I showed you this picture from Israel of my friend Lee, Rabbi Lee Buckman. The last time I was in Israel, I caught one of the signs that was up, and I also caught this sign in Rockland County during the measles outbreak. Measles are all over the place. V'holech. V'zikukin anu l'racham shamayim l'tfilot v'tachnunim. We better start praying, and we better start asking God for mercy. And what? V'anu modi'im kevan shekarov hadavar lepikuach nefesh. Because it's to a level of saving lives, chayav kol echad lid'og livnei beito sheyikablu chison. That everyone in our community should worry that each and every individual in his or her household should get the operative word here, chison, the vaccine. So you have the posters in the religious community obviously needing to rely on opinions within our tradition that were as strong a statement as this was, because that is a Jewish outlook, to base yourself in halachic standards. They ultimately splashed on all the walls and posted on all the fences these posters that said, get that vaccination. Now, we have bitachon, we have trust in medicine. And it's actually in the last book of the Bible that we have the clearest statement of that. And when I turn to a last book of the Bible in 2 Chronicles, and I look back at what's said before that in Exodus, I do what's called intertextual work. I look at one text in the Tanakh and I say, how does this text sit with this other text that I read earlier in the Jewish Bible? And so look at this wonderful text in 2 Chronicles. In the 39th year of his reign, Asa suffered from an acute foot ailment, but ill as he was, he still did not turn to the Lord, but to physicians. Asa slept with his fathers. He died in the 41st year of his reign. Now, read in conjunction with this Exodus text, you see what the statement is already about Jews going to the doctors. We're not at vaccines yet. We went back in time to the Tanakh here. But we're showing how inclined we are to go get that medical treatment. The Lord cries out in Exodus 15 and makes the water sweet. In other words, takes away the bitterness of the water and maybe something that's going to be poisonous to the people. And ultimately, this ends with God saying, Ki ani Adonai rofecha. I am God, your healer. Comes the Torah itself before 2 Chronicles and says, don't take that so literally. We're not just depending on God for sweet water or for our health. We are saying, yes, God, we know you're Rifa'enu Adonai v'nei Rafeh. You are Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael. You are the healer of Israel. Prayer and tachanunim can work, like the poster said up top. But we also know, right in Exodus, that we were given permission, doctors were given permission to heal, and that is to heal symptoms, and it will be in the future, according to Jewish law, to give vaccinations as preventative measures. Because it says at the end of this verse, Rapo Yirapeh, that when somebody is injured, we must find a cure. Now, this actually says that a person who injures somebody should pay the kind of bills, the medical bills. But the Gemara ultimately said that this quote, Rapo Yirapeh, Mikan Shenitna Reshut L'Rofe L'Rapot. From here, doctors and the world of medicine has permission to seek treatments for ailments and preventative measures like vaccinations, to prevent disease and public health emergencies. This Midrash describes Rabbi Akiva proving to a guy who says to him, Rabbi, do you know what the doctor has prescribed for this? And Rabbi Akiva says, yeah, I think it's such and such, but go check with the doctor. And he says, but aren't you messing with what God's plan was because I'm sick? And he says, I see you're carrying a hoe, a sickle. Are you messing with the field? Don't you have to turn the soil? Don't you have to care for it? Don't you have to plant? Don't you have to weed it? Don't you have to spread manure on it? Something that you thought was fat. You have to take manure and you have to fertilize this field. Well, guess what? Sometimes a medicine, you might not even think of it as a medicine, but you have an obligation to actually listen to these doctors. Beyond that, there are sources that really give us the sense that we are out to protect ourselves. For your own sake, be most careful. This principle, this is a foundational principle in any approach to doing the right thing vis-a-vis public health. So a lot of times when people talked about social distancing or physical distancing, a lot of times when people say, okay, even if I've had the disease, I'll wear the mask for the social contract. I'll wear a mask even if I'm outside and I'm 12 feet away from people, because there's a social contract that comes with this. That's this verse, v'nishmartem ma'od. I will for sure do more than is required of me to be a guard and guarding our health. V'nishmartem ma'od l'nafshotechem. And that spirit comes through when we build a house. We don't want anyone to fall off the roof, so we make a parapet around it. When you build a new house, vasita ma'ake ligagecha. You don't wait for the traffic accident to put up the traffic light, right? You don't wait for the person to fall off the roof in order to build the higher fence. So that's really a positive commandment. And the Rambam will say there's no difference between a roof or anything else that's dangerous and likely to cause death to a person or cause him to stumble. And so he uses physical examples, not microorganisms, but we learn from this about the microorganisms that cause disease. And we say, Hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha. In the Hebrew, we say, not only do you guard yourself, but you create barriers and you put up fences and guardrails around you. The human body is like a house, according to spiritual sources. You must guard yourself and put extra protection measures in place. And for sure, there were those who said, well, you know what? It's my life. I don't have to do any of that. And the Rambam knew who was going to be out there saying, I'm the freedom fighter. I'm not looking for communal moral obligation that smacks of what's better for the community. Well, he already knows that there are certain people who are going to start thinking like that. And yes, I know that's a little bit what might sound to some confrontational, what might sound to others like a real polemic. Like, what's the balance between a personal individual freedom and a moral obligation to community? But the Rambam addresses it. The sages have prohibited many things because they are dangerous to life. If anyone disregards them and says, what claim have others on me if I risk my own life? Or I don't mind this. What does the Rambam say? Makinoto makat mardu. You give him lashes for being too much of a rebel. You give him lashes. And basically that increases the level of the transgression to the level of a Torah-idic mitzvah as opposed to a D'Rabbanan mitzvah. A Torah level mitzvah has a little bit more standing than a rabbinic level mitzvah in the system of the rabbis. And so the Rambam really realizes that some people might say, I don't want to do this. I'm not doing it. that issue will come up with vaccination. And our own Rabbanim in the world of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards and Orthodox authorities will address this immoral way of thinking according to their standards when it comes to making decisions about vaccination. I just want to show you on a midrashic level, since Truth in Advertising, I said that the word midrash in my title, that from a midrashic standpoint and not a codific text, we're all in the same boat is a very Jewish saying. We're all in the same boat. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Mashal Livnei Adam Shahayu Yoshvim B'Sfina, Natal Echad Mehem Makdeach V'Hitchil Kodeach Tachtav. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught this midrash that there were men on a ship, and one of them took a drill and started drilling underneath him. The others said to him, "What are you doing?" And he replied, "What do you care? It's not underneath your seat that I'm drilling. It's underneath my seat. But the water will rise and flood us all on the ship. Amru lo shamayim olinu mitzifin aleinu et hasfina." We're all in the same boat. And we have to take responsibility for each other. We have to have that kind of mutual responsibility. And the Shulchan Aruch, the major code of Jewish law that's written in the 16th century by Rabbeinu Yosef Karo, says, likewise, one has a positive duty to either remove anything that's dangerous or guard against it, to be extra cautious. And so if that's the case, that we both remove and we guard against, and we're looking at these to inform halachic sources and approaches and Jewish approaches to vaccination, then these stand in very good kind of ways to say that we can both administer any healing medication in addition to practicing preventative medicine. The Shulchan Aruch, as I mentioned before, about different illnesses on Shabbat, goes so far as to say, we'll even put aside Sabbath laws. It may sound like absolutely morally non-contentious to us. We would put aside anything on Shabbat to do for anyone. But those living in a true consciousness, a true halachic consciousness when it comes to a framework of halachic consciousness when it comes to Shabbat, might think twice about doing every step of any action, even when it came to treating someone on the Sabbath. So you might make a decision as to, you might run to the hospital with your keys and start your car, but you might still, if your mind is working with Sabbath laws as a priority, you might leave your wallet home with your money, because it's ingrained, it's in there, that you're doing what you need to do for the chole. You're putting on the chicken soup. You're even lighting the fire to warm up a bowl of chicken soup on the Sabbath. I mean, everybody knows the medicinal properties of chicken soup. I don't think it's an argument anymore, even though it's like, I understand from the doctors in the JAMA journal or whether or not there's true healing power. But the sources say very explicitly, you do what you need to, but one who is conscious about the Sabbath would be pleased to see this and understands the import of the following law from the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim. And that is every illness that the doctors say is dangerous, even though it is external on the flesh. And it might not seem so serious. In other words, they desecrate the Sabbath for it. Mechalolin alav et haShabbat. So we know how deeply important this is. And that leads us to a little bit of the now actual texts about vaccination in halachic history. I mentioned that you can read a Jewish responsum as a document which either gives you an indication of whether something is permissible or whether it's forbidden. But you can also read it in terms of its social history, and what Jews were thinking about comes to light when you read halachic literature with this kind of an approach. So what were Jews asking in the 19th century, mid-19th century? What were they wondering about? What were they considering? What might have they limited their lives in terms of halacha with? What might they have needed express permission for? What did they think was part of what I call the holiest game that we play, right? The game of life according to Jewish law. That's basically how you have to see halacha, that you're willing to play the game of life according to the obligations of Jewish law. And so when we read halachic literature that's as straightforward as these questions might seem to us, like, do we take the vaccine or do we not? And someone might say, of course we do. No, but we're asking because we have a sacred intentionality about all we do. And we're looking for that kind of sacred layering within our life experience. And so that's kind of how we have to read these, and we have to see what our ancestors were thinking about, what they were worried about, what they were asking about, and what they needed their rabbis to opine about, and also where the rabbis needed to open up their eyes and say, I'm not the real expert here. In this case, the doctors would be, and how they frame that in terms of what we need to know from scientists and what we need to know from doctors. So it's an interesting history this way. Kitzer Shulchan Aruch is created by Shlomo Gansfried in the 19th century. It's an abbreviated Jewish law code. And as you see, it says here, when a non-Jewish doctor comes to vaccinate children against smallpox, if the Jew can offer him compensation to postpone the vaccination until after Shabbos, he should do so. Here it is. It's not like a bris where you say to the moil, walk over, we're going to do it right after Shachri. They want to make a distinction. But if the doctor refuses, and there's a sense that he says, no way, I can't do this. I've got to go treat somebody else. And it must be done on Shabbos. In that case, the Jew should not hold the child, but let a non-Jew hold him. And here's how you work it out. And if, by the way, the non-Jew is not available to it, you're going to do it. So don't worry. In other words, we're creating the system by which this is going to be possible now that the doctor is here and the smallpox vaccination is in hand. Shnei Luchot HaBrit, before vaccinations were really that popular and people were bringing them with them on Shabbat and on any day of the week to inoculate populations. This is Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, who is a little bit before that time of the 19th century. He lives in the 16th century into the early 17th. And he says about this world of public health, before vaccines are really on the front and readily available, that people ought to really be engaged in a serious way, taking seriously the public health regulations that we know are the best ones that fight against rampant disease. And so he says, I'm surprised that when it comes to smallpox outbreaks, which spreads from child to child, why do people not take their children out of the city? Read that way for New Yorkers, by the way, it's like a direct question to us, the city. But what he was talking about is the cities like Krakow and the cities like Warsaw, because he's over there in Ashkenaz, in Poland. In the future, the fathers will be responsible for the deaths of their children who are nursing and have committed no sin, and those who are weaned and have committed no sins, and died from the sickness, whose fathers did not take them away from the city. Every man who fears God should fear every eventuality. So for Rabbi Horowitz, he says, until the vaccines are really readily available and we know we have the answer to this terrible disease that's plaguing us, that's infecting us, that's creating sickness and illness and the potential for my child to die, not that every one of them dies. They know that not everybody dies. They know that not every person who gets it dies, but they know it's an eventuality. They should fear every eventuality. It's a Jewish value to embrace the positive public health measures and take utmost care and watch yourselves scrupulously. And there we have that quote from Deuteronomy, Hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od. So we use the Torah sources to say, you got to do what it is that you need to do. But it does turn out that the vaccine comes on the scene. Doctors start carrying it, as we read, on Shabbat and during the week to all kinds of locations where the Jews are offered the inoculation. And of course, you can't expect that it was only the local Jewish doctor who had this. You probably needed to expect that it wasn't going to be necessarily supplied within the Jewish community. And Israel Lifshitz, who lives in the 19th century, rabbi first at Dessau and then the Jewish community of Danzig, he writes a beautiful commentary on the Mishnah. And in addition, he also has lots of commentaries on other texts and some more halachic material. And he wrote the following in his commentary on the Mishnah, on Masechet Avot. We see that there are some righteous among the non-Jews who know the Creator of the world and believe in his holy Torah and do good deeds also for the Jews. Some have done great things for the world, like the Chassid, he calls him a Chassid, Edward Jenner, who developed the smallpox vaccine that has saved myriads of people from sickness, death, and disfigurement. So there, the Tiferet Yisrael, very widely accepted authority, celebrates this creator, this righteous Gentile, this Chassid, right? A Chassid is not someone who just wears the dark black clothes, but who is true to the power that God grants us to be creators and to heal and to help all of humanity. He celebrates him. And then we see in Jewish law books, as this one is, the Aruch HaShulchan, it's a backwards name, like you've heard of the Shulchan Aruch. So now flip that, Aruch HaShulchan. So the Shulchan Aruch becomes the Aruch HaShulchan, and he does it for the connection to the name of the 16th century law code. And he lives smack in the middle of the 19th century up through 1908. And his source here, his passage here says, because smallpox is an infectious disease, the rule is to be far away from the city when an outbreak occurs. There's public health procedure to follow. And now, though, this is not common, since for about 150 years, doctors have given every small child a year of age or older cowpox, and because of this, they're saved from the disease smallpox, as is known. So what do we see from that? That Jewish religious community had accepted vaccination as a matter of course, and thank God they didn't all have to run from every disease now. They weren't experiencing anything new, like our pandemic is a new thing. But for the last 150 years, he says, doctors have been doing this, and obviously we have been accepting the inoculations, and we're set. By the way, the word over here, ababuot is the smallpox. Ababuot, a bu'ah is a little bubble. And there's also, in the word for inoculation in these sources is like a Hebraic Yiddish spelling, inoculation. The word chison that I showed you before, vaccine, is more used in modern Hebrew than in the other older sources. Now, there's also not just a stick in Ashkenaz, because I want to bring in our Sephardic brothers over here, commentary on the Shulchan Aruch that gets it up to date in the world of Baghdadi Judaism. And this is a source from Baghdadi Judaism, from Yaakov Chaim Sofer. And he says, where there are children with smallpox, we do not need to take the children out of the city, because now in these days there is a cure. Smallpox vaccine. He calls it a cure. Maybe it's not a cure. Maybe we would classify that a little differently. And there are specialists who administer it. So we trust those specialists who administer it. It is no longer like the Shlah. It's no longer like Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, whose text we read above from Poland, who writes that we need to take our children out of the city. In any case, the judgment of the Torah of Hashem We have specialists that make vaccines, and no person has been injured from it, and they do it every day. And when he says no person has been injured from it, there were those who pointed out that there were a small number of people who indeed were injured from it, and that was a fact of life vis-a-vis vaccination. And the responsa in our time will relate directly to that question. Now, as I mentioned, the halachic responsa in our time stem from both the conservative and Orthodox worlds, both here in America and in Israel. And I'm going to review some of those now so that we get a sense of where we are in terms of up-to-date sources about the vaccinations. Vis-a-vis the COVID-19 vaccines and the ethical questions posed by them, the new Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, Tshuva, says in 2005 already, the CJLS, that's the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, overwhelmingly approved a tshuva by Rabbi Joseph Krauser entitled Compulsory Immunization in Jewish Day Schools. There were only a few of us around the country who actually had to enforce that. It is the only time really, if I tell you, I mean, I get a lot of wonderful questions from Or Zarua people. And I know we have a lot of people in this community who really love and respect the Jewish tradition. But in terms of true enforcement of Jewish law as per the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, when I was a head of school at 2 different Solomon Schechters, we actually invoked this law and used this tshuva to fully make compulsory immunization within our school community. That question that Rabbi Krauser asked really was a question based on the fact that some people claimed exemption on religious grounds to refuse vaccinations. Rabbi Krauser, after a thorough examination of the sources and contemporary medical research, concluded failure to immunize children against vaccine-presentable disease is a serious compound violation of Jewish law. There is no basis in halacha to support a parent's request for a religious exemption from state-mandated immunizations. Now, the Magen Avraham is a commentary that we could go and rely on if we wanted to say, and where does that idea get amplified within our tradition? And there's this whole question actually is brought up in the Mishnayot, in the Mishnah passages around Yom Kippur, when someone's feeling ill and refuses to take medicine because they think it's ingesting something, let alone actually taking something and thwarting God's plan on the holiest day of the year. And it says, if the patient does not want the medicine, we force the patient to take it. If the patient says he requires a certain medicine and the doctor says the patient does not need it, we listen to the patient. If the doctor says another medicine will work better, we listen to the doctor. So we're putting our trust in the medical profession, in the testing that they know about the medications, in their wisdom about those medications. And of course, this doesn't say you can't get a second opinion, as we all do. This doesn't say there shouldn't be studies. We're relying on studies, and we're not putting this in theoretical constructs of, well, I only have this one doctor here and he's telling me to take this vaccine and I don't really know anything about it. We're putting it in the context of the FDA approvals and the 2 studies and the vaccines that are on the market, and the fact that we are now in this moment of a miraculous 2 new vaccines that have hit because of the pandemic. How do we weigh, though, the potential risk of a fast-track vaccine against its potential benefits for the individual and for society? If we're serious as Jews and we want to really invoke the halachic framework, we have to ask aloud the questions and not simply blindly trust the information that came to us when they give us the call, you're up. 2 sources are helpful in addressing this question. Both were written in response to Edward Jenner's invention of a safer smallpox vaccine at the turn of the 19th century. As David Ruderman has shown, at the time there was debate among Jewish authorities about the risk of introducing a small amount of smallpox into a healthy person. Rabbi Yisrael Lubshitz was an enthusiastic supporter of Jenner's vaccine. In the Boaz section of his Tiferet Yisrael, we were introduced to Tiferet Yisrael up top, the Mishnah commentary ultimately says that there is risk, there's infinitesimal risk, and which he describes as 1 in 1,000, which is an expression that you can't take, again, literally. You have to understand what is the acceptable amount of real risk of contracting anything. And if the science, of course, has created a vaccine where there's literally no risk and that it only creates the kind of immune response that we need, that's even better. But maybe there's going to be a risk, but ultimately the sources come down in Jewish terms and say the greater societal benefit of taking the vaccine, along with the serious consequences of contracting the disease, outweighs the risk it might pose to a few individuals. Now, again, that's not saying, there's another part of the tshuva that says, go talk to your physician and see if there's any contraindications. We do this knowingly. But we have to rely on such principles as were established at the time of the smallpox vaccines. Umizeh nireli, the Tiferet Yisrael says, from this kind of approach of thinking about risk and whether or not I'm going to take this vaccine and say, yes, everybody must take this vaccine as a matter of obligation, heter la'asot inoculation. There's your inoculation in the Yiddish right here, for those of you charting the vocabulary words for future learning. If you, that was a nod to my wife, my holy wife, with whom I got to discuss, different sources before this evening. So here we have this notion of risk, and afshe, I'm over here, afshe echad me'elef me al yad ha'inoculation, in terms of the inoculation, al kol panim she'im yithavu bo hapekakin ha'tivi'in ha'sakana krova yoter. If a person would get the actual disease, the danger would be greater. Ulechen rashai lahachnis et atzmo b'sakana rechoka kedei lahatzil et atzmo misakana krova. You should take the risk and put yourself in the small amount of danger that is at hand with the inoculation versus putting yourself in deeper danger and contracting the disease. So that is the operative principle. And here then comes some of the modern answers about vaccination in our Zoom and internet world today, as the new vaccines were made available. And of course, Israel got right on track. Rabbi Shlomo Chaim HaKohen Aviner is an Orthodox Israeli posek born in France, Rosh Yeshiva at Ateret Yerushalayim Yeshiva, very, very one of the top leaders of the religious Zionist movement. And he says, Shud Achison, the true vote on vaccines, he makes it very short. They try to keep these things very short these days, so people aren't reading the whole history. They're not as interested in the history as we might be reading for social history reasons. There is the source from Deuteronomy again that we quote, you must truly guard your lives. The sages of Israel really forbid a lot of things because of the dangers that they ultimately represented to human life. But the Rambam said, if you're the one to say about a vaccine, no one has control over my life and I don't have to do this because I'll be careful and I don't care. We give him lashes for violating, in this case, he says, a rabbinic commandment. And by quoting the Rambam, Hilchot Rotzeach. B'midinot moderniot, in modern countries, yesh cherut haprat. We have individual freedom, though. because in their community, they're worried that a certain percentage of the people will be against taking these vaccines. So they wanted to make strong statements, and these are only in the last days, to say, you must get in line. You must take this vaccine. We are protecting our way of life, despite any small amount of risk. Real freedom is to guard the Torah and mitzvot. You have no freedom to endanger children because you did not vaccinate them. And you also endanger others that are close to you. And there is in this the din of rodef, that you might be considered someone, if you don't get vaccinated, who might just be a danger to others. That is really strong language. Din rodef. You could be considered as someone pursuing another person to kill them. Now, Eliezer Melamed is an Israeli Orthodox rabbi and has become super popular for a series of books that you can find even in the Steinmatsky in the airport in Ben Gurion. A halachic series called Panine Halacha. It's like the next new wave of Jewish law codes that are not big and shelf heavy. They're small little volumes that you can stick in your bag. And he says about the obligations to vaccinate. Parents who do not want to vaccinate their children, however, can argue they're not required to follow the majority. For if they alone do not vaccinate their children, nothing will happen. And they too benefit from the vaccination of others. However, this position is based on an immoral point of view, because if everyone behaves in this manner, the population will not be vaccinated, and serious and contagious diseases will turn into epidemics. This position is the same as that of a person claiming that if he alone avoids military service, listen to this, he's writing, he's a religious Orthodox authority in Israel. So listen to this. The position is the same as that of a person claiming that if he alone avoids military service, the security of the state will not be harmed, because one less soldier will not change the state of national security, and he too benefits from the protection provided by those who do enlist. However, if everyone prefers his own personal safety and comfort, our situation will be dreadful. Will be dreadful. These are wonderful opportunities to make very serious points about the kind of progress people wish to see in both the healthcare and embracing modern science in Israel, in addition to serving the state, which is completely refreshing to see in this moment of fighting for the health of our nation in Israel and fighting for the health of the Jewish people everywhere. Now, I included some sources that I'm just going to skip over quickly that talk about those who are very much opposed to vaccination because they get amplified in the news. There's a very small percentage, by the way, and we shouldn't be that concerned. But so concerned was Rabbi Moshe Sternbruch, who is really a well-known authority about people who were expressing resistance to the vaccine, that he said that you might be so resistant, you might not do it, but certainly then the administration of the schools made the demand that those children that were not vaccinated not enter the Talmud Torah. And he said that about measles, and he's saying that about the current pandemic, about COVID-19, which is really out there and front line when you consider what someone in the community might really say about these folks. Likewise, Rabbi Asher Weiss is really a Borough Park authority from the Klausenberger family, very famous authority. And he's the Rosh Kola of Machon Minchas Oishel Torah. And he says, likewise, in the present case, a person is obligated to vaccinate his children because vaccination is not dangerous at all, except in extraordinary rare cases, whereas lack of vaccination endangers those very children. This is all the more certain given that lack of vaccination constitutes public endangerment. We are concerned about sakana l'rabim. We are concerned about danger to the public. In the Chicago Jewish community, I was only hoping my parents, my in-laws would be here. So a nod to the Chicago Jewish community, who was very, very much during the measles vaccination campaign on top of convincing everyone that they needed to really take very seriously this endeavor to vaccinate against it. Parents are urged to contact their primary care physician or local board of health to obtain the necessary MMR vaccination as soon as possible. Rabbi Shmuel First and Rabbi Yonah Rice, who are the Chicago Rabbinical Council and Agudas Yisrael of Illinois authorities, who said you must do this, and that stands as the authoritative letter back at the measles time, which gave a new sense of commitment to inoculation, and that inoculation which everybody is embracing during this time. I heard from a few people in that realm. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein is an Orthodox legal scholar and posek who has a 5-volume set of books on the idea of teaching Torah to doctors from a Jewish tradition. And he has a question in his books, his 5-volume book. This is a modern publication done, I believe, in 2019. And he says, Kfiya al chisun sheyesh bo chashash nezek mu'at. Shall we have doctors convince others about taking vaccinations? Shall they even be a little coercive? You hear the word kfiya in Hebrew and you can't but translate coercive. So we would say maybe convince would be the idiomatic English we might want to use. But people hear kfiya in Hebrew and they immediately have to translate coerce. Because when you talk about religious coercion in Israel, you talk about kfiya datit, right? Can there be any coercion? Kfiya al chisun sheyesh bo chashash nezek muat. If can I, as a doctor, should I, as a doctor, really coerce someone, really convince someone to take this? Is it permissible for a doctor to actually be coercive in trying to get them to take a vaccine? To create a preventative medicine, right? To heal someone from something ailing, he's not so worried about that there's a question. But about taking preventative measures, he wants to make this point deeply. And he says, we worry because it might be causing a little bit of damage to someone. There's some risks involved. And he says, can we at all cause any of this? Can we do something that has any risk involved? Tshuva, yesh lahaniach shekol adam yaskim lekabel toelet 97%. Everybody should be ready to accept a benefit to the society, a 97% success rate, as opposed to creating the situation where you're going to have a more dangerous reality and a disease-ridden reality in front of you. And that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're praying for. The Conservative Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, Orthodox poskim around the Jewish world have all said, even to be a little coercive, that now is the time we say, with a 95%, 97% success rate, that there's a little risk involved. Yes. More questions to ask, study them. Definitely. We pursue science. We pursue answers. Take the vaccine. From all accounts, we see that consulting with your physician, indeed, to see if any contraindication exists, is essential. But these vaccines that have such a benefit for individuals and society on the whole, like our distancing, like our mask wearing, like our washing hands, are essential components of our social contract, because unishmartem ma'od, we guard ourselves, but also we guard l'rabim. We worry about sakana l'rabim. We worry about the danger to the entire public. Getting to my last section for tonight, there have been several tefillot and beautiful blessings created and prayers created for people who are wanting to recognize this miraculous moment, say a prayer when they receive their vaccine, and continue praying when they realize that we're in this miraculous time of trying to get it right with distributing this or these vaccines into the public. Look, we're having a few hiccups. We have to make things right. So a little bit of prayer energy is not a bad thing. and that we should bless the people really trying to really get this right. This first one is a prayer that Hannah Katzman wrote that she said before she took her vaccine. And I'm going to end with these more spiritual texts that we have in front of us and these potential blessings that we have to say. And you can make a decision for yourself. You can call me to consult about which one speaks to you the most and follow up with me if you really want to get the liturgies, or think about one part of a prayer that you already say as being really right for this time. And you'll see some of those will come up in this last section of my talk. And then after that, I'll open up to your comments, reflections, and questions. So last section beginning. May it be your will, Hashem, our God and God of our forefathers, yavi refuah bracha v'hatzala, v'yagen aleinu miyisurim u'mimachalot kashot. May it be your will, God, that the vaccinations that we are about to receive will bring health, blessing, and redemption, and protect us from suffering and terrible diseases. May this vaccination work quickly with minimal pain and side effects. Through this vaccine, may we merit blessing and protection for infants, the elderly, and the sick who cannot be vaccinated. May it be your will that the nurses and doctors who provide our vaccines enjoy long and peaceful life, financial security, and success. May the merit of their preservation of our health stand in their stead until the end of their days. And through the merit of observing the commandment, you should guard yourself carefully. May we be privileged to raise children to Torah, the marriage canopy, and good deeds. Blessed is the one who hears prayer. Always thinking about the future. Always thinking about the future of the Jewish people at the end there with those familiar blessings. From our movement, Rabbi Karen Rees-Medved wrote the following: with gratitude and thanksgiving to the healer of broken hearts and restorer of broken bones, appreciation and thanks for inspiring the medical teams and scientists, granting them the wisdom, knowledge, and expertise to prepare this vaccine for all of us. May it be your will that with my vaccination, I will be granted the ability to heal and keep safe humankind, and be granted the privilege to fulfill the mitzvah of one who saves a life. Blessed are you, healer of all who are sick. These two, that prayer by Rabbi Medved and this one by Rabbi Robert Scheinberg and Rabbi Naomi Kalish, is on the Rabbinical Assembly website. You can go there and see their prayers, in addition to one from the Masorti movement in Israel, in addition to another reading that was done by another colleague, a wonderful writer. And this prayer is, I won't read the whole one here, but I'm ready to fulfill the positive commandment of my Creator to protect the human body. They write a kavanah, hineni muchan zuman l'kayim mitzvat aseh shel shmirat haguf kamo shekatuv b'Torah v'nishmartim ma'od l'nafshotechem. There it is again, that phrase we've been saying. We have a positive obligation to guard our bodies, and they say we're ready and invited and fulfilling the commandment to protect our bodies, and they're expressing thanks before the vaccination as they're ready to do it. Then after the vaccination, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who's created the human body with wisdom. Asher yatzar et ha'adam b'chochma, uvara vo nikavim chalulim chalulim, v'hitkayem v'la'amod lefanecha. Galui v'yadua lifnei chisei chevudecha, she'im yipatech echad mehem, o yisatem echad mehem, i efshar la'amod lefanecha afilu sha'ah achad, baruch atah Adonai, rofecho basar mafli la'asot. There's one line in the Hebrew that's actually missing from the website of the Rabbinical Assembly there that I filled in. But that is the blessing at the beginning of the morning service in any Siddur that comes before page 10 when we start for morning minyan. One of those that you can find there that's all about the wonders of the body. And so even if you didn't say the kavanah beforehand, if you wanted to say that God has made these amazing bodies and that we are instrumental partners in creating the medications, the vaccinations that help the bodies function in the right ways, the passageways, the airways in this case, the lungs that we so treasure, our breath. you might want to look at the beginning of your Siddur and find this blessing, which is called Asher Yatzar. Asher Yatzar Ta'adam B'chokhmah. You created all flesh with these wonderful passageways. I included, because someone asked me the question, Rabbi, after I get the vaccine, should I come say a gomel? Well, trust me, as a community, we're all going to say a gomel. When we are together again, when we're standing close, when we are healthy and when we are together, trust me, we're going to bench gomel after this whole craziness. So if that makes you feel like you don't have to worry about your individual time at the Torah, please rest easy, because we're getting together and we're benching gomel. Another person asked, is it a miracle, Rabbi? Which is where I got the idea. I was talking to this person about the miraculous nature of this time we're living in with these vaccines that came so quick. And there's a blessing that we can say where God does miracles in certain places, that we always remember those places as miraculous places, as places in which miracles were wrought for us. And there's a bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam she'asa li nes b'makom hazeh. Should I make a blessing, Rabbi, and call that place where I get my vaccine a place where a miracle happened for me? To me, that's a little bit strong, but if you feel like really you're recognizing miracles happen in front of us, this fast and this efficacious, these vaccines, I would say that really it's in the eye of the beholder what a miracle is. And the tradition is really open to you to define just how miraculous this moment is, just like the tradition is really open to when we say Shehechianu. Sometimes people will ask me, can I say a Shehechianu at this moment for this kind of occasion, for this kind of moment here if I get the vaccine? And you know, there is some limitation by way of the tradition about when we say Shehechianu, because the Shulchan Aruch likes to think, okay, it's when you wear a new article of clothing, when you get a new book, or when it's a yontiv, you say Shehechianu. And in the Gemara, the conversation comes, and they're talking about whether or not you could say Shehechianu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because they're not really yontivs. And so the conversation goes between Rava and Rav Huna. Do we say Shehechianu on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? And Rav asks Rav Huna, and he says, I don't know, right? And our tradition, by the way, is to say it, except on the second night. It's to say it over a new fruit or an article of clothing. But why do we say it over a new fruit? Because it's in this Gemara that he said, it's in Eruvin, by the way, page 42. Rav Yehuda says, what are you talking about? He overhears the conversation between Rava and Rav Huna. So Rav Yehuda says, what are you talking about? I make a Shehechianu bracha every time I eat a new vegetable or a new fruit. So from that, we take the spirit of something so new and amazing as a fruit or a vegetable that he hasn't eaten for a whole season. He could say Shehechianu. Well, alachat kama v'kama, all the more so, you who's experiencing getting this new vaccine in record time for a dangerous infectious disease that's out there that could really impact your life and impact your goof, your body. Yeah, if you want to say Shehechianu, say Shehechianu. We know though also that there are some people who hold that when you hear good news, you say the blessing, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hatov v'hametiv, the one who's good and who does good. If that's your choice of blessing, I'm right with you as well. Again, you're going to call me and you're going to say, can we go through these again, Rabbi, so that I can figure out which one I want to say if you really want to say something for when you get it. So, or you'll watch the recording because we're recording tonight. So here's the next. I already say in my Amida, the prayer for healing. Can I have certain kavanah that I'm really going to now insert a little prayer to say, please God, let those who need it get it. Please God, let those who are working on the distribution really get it right. And let those who are supplying it supply enough, and let us see a world that rises up out of this pandemic Sooner? Yeah. Between the spaces of the letters of your Rifa'enu prayer and your Amida, put it in. Wait till the Amida is done, put it at the end. But make those words of prayer really happen. You want to say a Mishaberach? Remember, you can say a Mishaberach for yourself if you're ill, let alone for others. And you can make a Mishaberach for Cholim, as we have been doing every day at Daily Minyan, and when we get together online for all of our community events. And when we say the Mishaberach, we're also really praying, again, between the words, between the spaces, between the letters. We're really praying for this medication, this vaccination, this inoculation to really be successful. Finally, there are those who say, and I told you about Penine Halacha, that book that sold at Steinmatsky, that's like a new Jewish law code. There's a little prayer that was written for every time you take an aspirin, let alone a vaccination. And some are choosing to say this line that I've bolded here. Yehi ratzon, may it be your will, God, sheyehiyeh esek ze li l'refua shlema, that this entire endeavor should be for me and for all of us for complete healing. Because ki rofei chinamata, because you are a healer of all souls and bodies, and you wish for the world to know only good health, is the kavanah of that small kavanah itself, that small, if you will, prayer to add to any kind of medication we need to take, but especially to this one. Our openness to recognizing that we're living in a miraculous time and that it deserves our true gratitude to God, and being grateful to all those who have worked so hard on getting us to where we stand today, despite all of the dangers that still exist, and the hard decisions that we have to make about navigating this world where infection is still a possibility for some. There are two ways to look at the world or live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle, and the other is though everything is a miracle. Thank you. Really pleased to take your reflections or your thoughts or your questions so that we could have a little bit of sharing before we say goodnight.
Rabbi, I would just like to say that you got all the science absolutely correct. I don't take any issues with that. So congratulations. Plus, it was the most uplifting, I don't want to say coercive, but certainly convincing talk that I've heard, and really so uplifting. And I want to thank you so much for it.
Thank you so much, Donna.
So, Rabbi, I want to also pile on Donna's comments. It was really fabulous. And just say, since Hanukkah, I've been telling everyone I've added the vaccines as this year's miracle to the list of many miracles. So I think it came just in time for Hanukkah. And I think that it's a very powerful message for us all.
Well, it means so much to hear from both of you, Donna and Barry. Thank you so much, Barry. I think it is a miracle for all of us. And good to fold it into Hanukkah. Yeah, really, the glow of Hanukkah can continue with what you've said.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi. That was terrific. That nails it for anybody that has any doubts about where Judaism stands on this.
So glad, Richard, and it should be for comfort for you and to Harriet on this night of Shiva at your place, and together for learning.
Rabbi Yasher Koach, you covered all the bases of eliminating any doubt about embracing the miracle of the vaccine. One comment that in the Monsey area, at least early on, there were parents who were gathering their children in order to hope that all of them would get the virus and they would be immune. They would receive immunity, maybe herd immunity, among their small community. I think their leaders pushed them against that, but how does that fit into Jewish thought?
Well, look, right now, we see such an embrace of not only the inoculation, but we see authorities in Israel standing up and saying, now is the time to embrace science. This is, in a strange way, the pandemic has created an opportunity for the Haredi community to start to do some self-reflecting in a way that they had not done previously. And I attribute that not only to the, kind of next stage education of many of their authorities, which they have taken very seriously. As I told you, there's a 5-volume set of Torah for doctors, and that set, relies on a lot of wisdom out there about what's medically valid and good information for doctors to have vis-a-vis, even if it's through a Torah lens. So right now we're seeing a real embrace. Different public health policymakers have different ways of looking at potentially combating and dealing with these kinds of things. Parents knew from chickenpox parties in the past, and these things impacted the way we all think. But I would just say on the heels of your question that this moment in history in Israel, in America, has brought out more of the positivity towards science and scientific inquiry and medicine vis-a-vis some of these moves than before. You're going to hear amplified some of the naysayers. You really are going to hear some of the naysayers, and that's going to be amplified in the media and in the press. But we can read from the authorities who are important to this world right now that there's a real hope that they would not put their children or each other into any more danger than is absolutely necessary. And these sources that we went through today are those that are being, printed on pages and in short form as well, as I showed you, so that folks wouldn't be too bogged down in long passages, because the long read doesn't get very far in any community these days. Final note, even social media is taking its place to bring out positive messages within Muncie, within Bnei Brak, within Jerusalem, in communities around there. And I see it as being very promising. Amy.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi. No, it was wonderful to hear, because I got to hear the prelude to the talk. So I want to say what I find really inspiring about all these halachic sources, not just, and I want to move it away from the Haredi community and also talk about, what's come out of our community. I think especially in the liberal Jewish world, so many of us think about halakha as limiting in a negative way. And I see this uniting between, let's say if we're talking about more modern halachic movements, the conservative movement and the more modern Orthodox movement, really taking halachic authority and saying this is a positive, not going to the point of saying it's a mitzvah, but it's something that we have to do for a positive reason, because not just we want to protect ourselves, and it's not just about being insular as a Jewish community. It's about our responsibility to the whole community, right? These tshuvot don't say we need to do it because we need to protect the Jewish community. We need to protect the entire community. And so that's part of what I found really inspiring. The other thing that I found myself thinking about is that, in a time, and this is not to get into politics, this is just a general reflection. I think in a time where there's a lot of questioning of authority in so many ways, and questioning in particular of the scientific and medical authorities, just because we all have so much more access to information, right? How many of us have Googled a symptom, right? We're told, don't Google a symptom, don't Google your diagnosis. We all do it. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but all of us do it. And And one of the messages I really got from the talk tonight is, you know what, we have to do a better job of trusting our experts. And yes, we can, we can have our conspiracy theories, we can have whatever, but the reality is thank God in the United States, we have well-trained doctors, we have proven systems for developing vaccines, for doing medical studies. And we're really saying that as Jews, we have not only can we, but we have an obligation to trust the experts and understand that we need to rely on experts and community to help us make decisions. And it also frees us from, having to make those Google decisions ourselves. So those were just really two great inspirations that I draw out of it. So thank you.
You'll have almost the last word, Amy, and thank you for your reflections. I'll just end tonight with, again, a deep appreciation, Hakarat Tov, for all of you coming out on a Monday night, first week back to our work lives in 2021. It should be a year of blessing and good health. Yishar Koach for coming tonight. And final note, even if it's on Shabbos and you need to run and get your vaccine, you saw the source. So let's pursue all we need to in a kum va'aseh kind of way, halachically. Get up and let's go do what we need to. And let's pray and let's make the blessings we need to for a world full of healing and goodness. Laila Tov.
Shakor.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Excellent.
Yishkor.
Excellent.